The fluorescent lights of Apex Technologies hummed their lonely midnight song as Marcus Chen pushed his cleaning cart down the executive floor hallway. His rubber-soled shoes made soft whispers against the polished marble, the only sound in a building that housed 1,000 dreams during daylight hours. At 42, Marcus had learned that life rarely unfolded according to plan. The engineering degree gathering dust in his apartment drawer, the wedding ring he'd stopped wearing 3 years ago, the tired ache in his shoulders that never quite disappeared, all testaments to roads not taken, to sacrifices made in the name of love. His daughter Emma needed stability more than she needed a father chasing dreams, and so he cleaned offices at night and drove her to school each morning, finding dignity in the work that kept their small world turning. Tonight felt different somehow. The air carried a strange weight, thick with something Marcus couldn't name. He'd worked this building for 2 years, knew its rhythms like a familiar song. The executives always left by 8. The lights on the 42nd floor always went dark by 9. But tonight, a sliver of golden light spilled from beneath the corner office door, the CEO's sanctuary, a place Marcus had only glimpsed through glass walls during his cleaning rounds. Catherine Morrison. Even her name carried authority. Forbes had called her a visionary. Tech Weekly dubbed her the Ice Queen of Innovation. Marcus had seen her exactly twice, once in the lobby, surrounded by assistants, moving like a comet through lesser orbits, and once in a company-wide video where she'd announced record profits with the warmth of a winter storm. He'd never expected to hear what he heard now, the unmistakable sound of someone crying. Marcus froze, his hand on the cleaning cart handle. Every instinct told him to walk away. People like Catherine Morrison didn't want witnesses to their pain. People like him weren't supposed to exist in her world except as invisible hands that emptied trash and buffed floors. But Marcus had raised a daughter through nightmares and skinned knees and middle school heartbreaks. He knew the particular timbre of grief that needed acknowledgement, not solitude. He knocked softly. The crying stopped instantly, replaced by a silence so complete it seemed to swallow sound itself. "Housekeeping," Marcus said quietly. "Just checking if you need anything, ma'am." "Go away." Her voice cracked on the second word, betraying everything the first tried to hide. Marcus should have left, should have respected the boundary she'd drawn. Instead, he thought of Emma, of the night she'd locked herself in the bathroom after kids at school mocked her secondhand clothes, of how she'd only opened the door when he'd sat outside and told her about his own childhood, about being different, about surviving. "I've got coffee," Marcus said, which was partly true. He had the cheap instant packets from the break room. The real stuff. Not that machine sludge. A long pause. Then, the doors open. Marcus entered a space that seemed designed to intimidate. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the city skyline like a conquered kingdom. Awards lined shelves of imported wood. Everything gleamed with success, except the woman curled in the leather chair behind the massive desk, mascara tracking dark rivers down her face, her $3,500 suit rumpled like yesterday's laundry. Catherine Morrison looked up at him with eyes that held an exhaustion deeper than physical fatigue. For a moment, neither spoke. Marcus saw something flicker across her face, surprise, perhaps, that he hadn't fled or pretended not to notice her tears. "I lied about the coffee," Marcus admitted, setting down his cart. "But I can get you tissues and water, if you'd like." A sound escaped her throat, something between a laugh and a sob. "Honest janitor. That's refreshing." Marcus retrieved the tissues from his cart, placed them on her desk without comment. He filled a paper cup with water from the cooler in her office suite. Simple gestures. Human gestures. When he set the cup beside the tissues, Catherine's hand trembled as she reached for it. "Thank you," she whispered. Then, after a long drink, "Do you know what today is?" Marcus shook his head. "My mother's birthday. She would have been 63. Catherine's fingers tightened around the paper cup. "She died 6 months ago. Pancreatic cancer. I was in Tokyo closing a merger when she went into hospice. Singapore when she took her last breath. I told myself the company needed me. That she'd understand. That I'd make it up to her." The words tumbled out like water from a broken dam. Marcus recognized the phenomenon. How strangers sometimes made the best confessors, how darkness and exhaustion dissolved the walls people built around their pain. "I bought this building in her honor," Catherine continued. "Donated wings to hospitals in her name. Funded cancer research centers. But tonight, I'm sitting in this office that's really just an expensive cage, and I realized I can't remember the last real conversation we had. The last time I just sat with her and talked about nothing important. The last time I was her daughter instead of Catherine Morrison, CEO. Marcus pulled up the chair across from her desk, a liberty he'd never normally take, and sat down. My wife died 3 years ago, he said quietly. Car accident. She was driving home from her sister's house, and some kid texting ran a red light. I got the call at my engineering job, raced to the hospital, but she was already gone. The last thing I'd said to her that morning was that I was annoyed she'd forgotten to buy milk. Catherine's eyes met his, recognition passing between them, the fellowship of loss, the burden of final moments that could never be reclaimed. I had a choice after that, Marcus continued. Keep chasing the career, put Emma in after-school programs and with babysitters, maintain the trajectory I'd planned. Or step back, be present, choose differently than I'd chosen before. He gestured around the office. This job doesn't pay much. My old colleagues probably think I lost my mind. But I make Emma breakfast every morning. I'm there when she gets home from school. I know her friends' names and her favorite songs and what makes her laugh. I can't undo missing those last conversations with my wife, but I can make sure my daughter doesn't spend her life wondering if I was really there. Silence settled between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the silence of two people who'd stumbled into unexpected truth, who'd found connection in the last place either expected. Catherine wiped her eyes, leaving fresh smears of mascara. When she spoke again, her voice held a different quality, softer, younger somehow. There's a charity gala tonight. Honoring my mother's memory, actually. All the important people are there right now, networking and writing checks and saying appropriate things. I was supposed to give a speech about her legacy. She laughed bitterly. Her legacy. As if I knew anything about what really mattered to her in the end. She looked at Marcus then with an expression he couldn't quite read. Vulnerability mixed with something else, a kind of desperate courage that comes from standing at the edge of old patterns and contemplating the jump into new ones. Will you be my date tonight? Catherine asked. The question hung in the air between them, absurd and earnest and utterly sincere. I know it's crazy. I know you're working. I know we're from different worlds. But I'm so tired of attending these things alone, surrounded by people who only see the title. I just want someone real beside me. Someone who understands. Just for a few hours. Please. Marcus thought of Emma, asleep at his sister's house tonight. He thought of his cleaning cart and his responsibilities. He thought of all the reasons this was inappropriate, unprofessional, impossible. Then he thought of his wife, and the milk, and all the moments that slipped away while people convinced themselves there would be time later. I'm not exactly dressed for a gala, Marcus said, gesturing to his janitor's uniform. Catherine stood, sudden energy animating her movements. There's a men's boutique downstairs that owes me favors. They'll still be there setting up for a morning event. She paused, hope and fear warring in her expression. Is that a yes? Marcus smiled. That's a yes. An hour later, Marcus stood in a borrowed tuxedo that fit surprisingly well, beside a woman who'd repaired her makeup but whose eyes still held traces of honest emotion. The gala sparkled with wealth and influence, but Catherine kept her hand lightly on Marcus's arm, anchoring herself to something real. When she gave her speech, she didn't talk about mergers or donations or legacy projects. She talked about her mother's laugh, about Sunday morning pancakes, about the year they'd built a treehouse together in the backyard. She talked about learning, too late, that love wasn't measured in grand gestures but in showing up, in being present, in choosing connection over achievement. Marcus stood at the edge of the stage and watched a room full of powerful people see Catherine Morrison as human for perhaps the first time. Several were crying. Others looked uncomfortable, confronted with truths they'd been avoiding in their own lives. Later, as the night wound down, Catherine turned to Marcus. Thank you. Not just for tonight. For seeing me when I needed to be seen. Thank you for asking, Marcus replied. For having the courage to choose differently. They both knew this night was its own contained story, not the beginning of a fairy tale romance, but something perhaps more valuable, a moment of genuine human connection that would ripple forward into changed choices, into different priorities, into lives reshaped by remembered humanity. Marcus went home to his daughter. Catherine went home to her empty penthouse, but she took something with her. The memory of a janitor who'd heard her crying and chosen kindness, who'd reminded her that titles and achievements mattered far less than the courage to be authentically, vulnerably human. Sometimes salvation comes not from grand gestures but from simple ones: a knock on a door, a cup of water, a willingness to sit with someone else's pain and recognize it as your own. Sometimes the most important question isn't about business strategies or profit margins, but, will you be my date tonight? A request for witness, for presence, for the kind of connection that reminds us why we're here at all.